By the time the skyline pressed itself against the penthouse glass, I already regretted walking in. I am Elena Brooks, and Chicago looked expensive from this height, chrome and light everywhere, and my sister, Tara Brooks, belonged to it as if the city had been arranged for her. I stood in the polite shadow near the bar, a guest at her victory parade, measuring every smile against the cost of staying. The program unfurled the way these nights do. Boss praise, numbers, applause. Then the room pivoted toward me. In a practiced tone dressed as humor, Tara framed me for the crowd, degreeless, futureless, supposedly cushioned by family generosity. Laughter rose and rolled. Even our parents, Martin and Evelyn Brooks, floated on it. Heat climbed my neck, but it cooled mid-breath into something steadier. I lifted a flute I hadn't ordered, let the bubbles hiss against my lip, and made a decision so quiet it didn't need sound. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I left my glass on linen and walked for the elevator with the calm of a person finally finished underwriting other people's stories. In the mirrored doors, I met a version of myself I had postponed for years, unapologetic, solvent, done. Behind me, the music rethreaded. Ahead, the corridor held its breath. No messages were owed, no scenes required. I had already answered the only question that mattered. Who gets to name me? What begins as silence is often a ledger. Tonight I balanced mine clean, exact, enforceable. Let them keep their echoing room and its borrowed laughter. I would keep the one thing they could not spend, the right to walk away, and the discipline to never look back. If you were in Elena's place, would you leave in silence or confront the room? Morning found me at a small kitchen table with a list to zero out and the resolve to make every line disappear. Morning found me in the still geometry of my apartment. No music, no movement, only the quiet hum of appliances pretending to be company. The air had that washed-out light of a day that refused to start. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a list glowing on the screen. It wasn't work, it was inventory, every connection that had to be undone. Every line of generosity that had begun as love and ended as obligation. My fingers moved through numbers like cutting wires. Mom's car insurance canceled. Dad's phone plan removed. The monthly transfer labeled Tara Loan Help erased. Small clicks, soft confirmations. They stacked like punctuation in a language I finally understood. Silence as policy, distance as proof. Messages began to gather on my phone in a slow storm. My mother's tone of concern that sounded like accusation. My father's insistence that everything had been a misunderstanding. None of them mentioned the word apology. They wrote like shareholders defending a company image, as if I were public relations for their conscience. I read each message once, not for content but for pattern. Then I pressed delete until the inbox was clean again. The quiet grew structural, not empty. I could hear the building breathing pipes, elevators, someone's dog tapping across the hallway. Ordinary sounds stitched themselves into a kind of peace. I realized I didn't miss them. I missed the version of me that still tried to please them. She had died politely, and I hadn't noticed the funeral. In the afternoon, I opened my banking app. The numbers looked different when no one else's name floated beside them. Mine alone, balanced, unshared. 8 years of subtle extraction disguised as kindness had finally stopped. I wasn't rich, but I was solvent, and solvent felt like freedom. I made coffee and let it go cold. My reflection in the window looked like someone who had weathered a long audit and come out with clear books. The guilt that had been braided into my family's affection began to unspool. They had taught me that to love meant to pay, that debt was a form of devotion. But I had learned a new equation. Love without respect is just charity pretending to be virtue. By evening, the phone had gone still. The absence of their names on the screen felt ceremonial, like the final line signed on a contract's termination. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling cracks that looked like faint maps. I imagined them as routes I used to travel: childhood obligations, unspoken trades, all leading to the same destination: exhaustion. The city outside moved on its own schedule, taxis blinking below, trains carving lines through steel. Somewhere in that motion, I felt something loosen inside my chest, not triumph, not revenge, but an unburdening so thorough it almost frightened me. A notification blinked in the corner of my screen, an unread email from Omar Reed, my team lead. Subject: Opportunity, need to talk. My pulse shifted, quick but steady. It wasn't family reaching in. It was the world I had built despite them answering back. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stood by the window, watching the river catch the late light. For once, there was nothing left to fix, no one to placate, no apology to compose. The day thinned into evening. and I realized the silence wasn't empty anymore. It had shape, purpose, and my name on the lease. When the first city lights began to spark, I opened Omar's message. It was short, an invitation to discuss a new position, something about leadership, higher stakes, better pay. I read it twice and smiled without meaning to. Not because of the offer, but because the timing was perfect. Freedom has its own symmetry. When you stop financing other people's peace, the universe recalibrates the interest. I closed the laptop. The room darkened around me. Tomorrow would start early, and I wanted to meet it as someone unbound. Weeks later, the rhythm of work began to feel like gravity again, steady, relentless, and strangely kind. The weeks moved like polished stones, smooth, cold, without friction. Work became rhythm, and rhythm became proof that life could be rebuilt in silence. My days started before sunrise, long before the city shook off its fatigue. I liked those hours when the world hadn't begun demanding anything yet. The screen glowed, the cursor blinked, and in that small light I found something close to control. Omar Reed kept his word. The opportunity turned into a new position, team lead on a complex infrastructure project. I accepted it without hesitation. Leadership had once sounded like exposure, but now it meant structure, boundaries, command. The team was sharp, ambitious, young enough to challenge me but not reckless enough to underestimate me. For the first time, my competence was not an afterthought. There was no applause, no party, just deliverables and quiet acknowledgement in performance reviews. I preferred it that way. Progress without witnesses felt cleaner, less like performance and more like precision. Every late night spent debugging lines of code built a wall between who I had been and who I was becoming. Sometimes, though, silence carried its own questions. The mind would wander mid-task, wondering if mom still cooked too much for dinner, or if dad had finally fixed that creaking door in the hallway. But I never reached for the phone. The urge came, then dissolved under the memory of laughter that had cut too deep. Nostalgia, I learned, was a form of emotional credit too easy to spend, impossible to reclaim. The promotion came faster than I expected. The email from HR called it merit-based advancement, but it felt like more than that. It was validation not from others, but from the data itself. Results, consistency, numbers that didn't need opinion to be real. My salary shifted into 6 figures. The contract had my name, mine alone. No invisible family strings attached. I moved into a new apartment on the north side, closer to the river. The first night there, the air smelled of new paint and paper dust. I walked through empty rooms, each echo answering like freedom in disguise. I bought no furniture for weeks, choosing instead to let the emptiness remind me of what it meant to start clean. At work, Omar began introducing me as our quiet architect. I liked the phrase. Quiet wasn't weakness anymore. It was control refined down to its purest form. I watched colleagues compete for visibility while I built the system beneath their noise. Results, not volume, became my language. Every so often, Tara's name appeared in my peripheral world, LinkedIn notifications, mutual connections, the digital debris of a life still spinning in the same orbit. Her posts glowed with success quotes and hollow gratitude, the kind that sounded like someone auditioning for forgiveness. I never clicked, never commented. Indifference had matured into art. Winter approached early that year. The city turned brittle and gray, but I found warmth in structure, project timelines, code reviews, the hum of servers working flawlessly. I had become part of a machine that rewarded precision, not pedigree. And for the first time, I slept without the weight of comparison pressing on my chest. On a late Friday night, long after the office had emptied, I stood by the glass wall overlooking the city. The lights below looked orderly, each window a life contained, private, controlled. I thought about how much noise people make trying to prove they matter. Then I realized I didn't need to prove anything anymore. My worth had stopped being negotiable the night I walked away. A few weeks later, Omar stopped by my desk, leaving a note instead of words. Leadership Summit in DC next quarter. You're nominated. I smiled. Not because it was recognition, but because it was quiet recognition, the kind that never needs to be announced to exist. I packed my bag, locked the office, and stepped into the cold. The streets were slick with frost, the air thin and honest. My breath fogged briefly before disappearing into the wind. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. I had already built it, line by line, day by day, until it became architecture. And for the first time, I realized the climb wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about proving silence could build empires too. The thaw arrived quietly. But it didn't come alone, it brought a name back into the inbox I thought I had erased forever. Snow had already melted into gray puddles when I saw the name. It appeared in the list of candidates for a new managerial position, Elena Brooks. Same name, same resume rhythm I had once heard her boast about at family dinners. I froze for a breath that stretched longer than reason allowed. Life, it seemed, had a sense of symmetry sharper than vengeance. I was now the director of systems development. The role required reviewing applicants who would collaborate across departments. Tara had applied through the general portal, which meant her file arrived like any other numbers, titles, and carefully curated success. The only unfamiliar detail was an essay section, a new HR initiative I had approved months earlier. The prompt, "What does accountability mean to you?" Curiosity, quiet and deliberate, replaced surprise. I opened the file. The words stared back, fluent and hollow. Accountability is ownership. It's about showing up even when things get difficult. It's about integrity and humility. I stopped there. My sister, fluent in corporate repentance, preaching virtues she'd never practiced. I didn't delete it. I didn't flag it. I simply left it to process through the same filters as everyone else. Professionalism had become my armor, and I had no reason to remove it. Yet, beneath the neutrality, I felt something like gravity shifting an old wound, remembering its coordinates. Days passed. HR shortlisted 8 candidates. Tara's name survived the first cut. I wasn't surprised. Her background was impressive enough to clear basic screening. Still, the idea of her walking into my company felt unreal, like a past life testing its way back into the present. The interview day arrived under a sky the color of metal. I sat at the panel table beside Omar Reed and Janelle Harris, our VP of Operations. Files stacked in front of us. Water bottles lined neatly between pens. Professional ritual. When Tara entered, the air changed shape. Her posture was confident, practiced, maybe even defiant. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on me. Recognition flickered, died, then returned as composure. My heartbeat didn't accelerate, it slowed. Observation replaced emotion. She introduced herself to the room, her tone bright and self-assured. The rest of the panel listened politely. My mind didn't. It cataloged the cadence of her voice, the phrasing of control disguised as charm. When my turn came to ask a question, I didn't address her name, didn't grant familiarity. My voice was even. Describe a time you managed conflict between colleagues where you might have been part of the problem. She paused, too long to be spontaneous, then delivered a polished story about alignment, team synergy, collective goals. Every sentence rehearsed, smooth, frictionless, and therefore dishonest. Her eyes met mine again, searching for the reaction she once relied on. There was none. Indifference is quieter than hate, but twice as final. The interview ended. She thanked everyone, shook hands, and left. The door clicked softly behind her, but the echo felt like an ending years late. Omar turned to me first. "Strong candidate, right?" I nodded without nodding. My notes were already written. Technically qualified, questionable authenticity. When the committee debriefed later that afternoon, I spoke only when necessary. No bitterness, no satisfaction, just the accuracy of observation. "Her experience is solid," I said. "But her examples are memorized. She manages perception, not people." Silence followed. Then Janelle marked something on her tablet. "We'll proceed with the next candidate." That was it. No arguments, no explanations. The decision unfolded on its own weight. By the following week, another name filled the slot. Elena Brooks declined. I expected some feeling relief, triumph, vindication, but there was none, only stillness, the kind that follows a storm after everything fragile has already fallen. That evening, as I left the office, the elevator doors mirrored my reflection again, just like the night of her promotion years ago. But this time, the face staring back at me wasn't the same woman who'd walked away out of pain. This was someone who had learned that closure wasn't something given. It was something built, deliberately, sentence by sentence, policy by policy, silence by silence. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain on asphalt. The city pulsed around me alive, indifferent, fair. Justice didn't need an audience, it needed consequence. And tonight, consequence had spoken fluently. Weeks later, a different name returned, not hers, but the one that once called itself family. The message arrived on a Wednesday morning, short, almost cautious. The sender's name read Evelyn Brooks. I hadn't seen it in years. My mother's email address still used the same floral domain she loved, a quiet relic from an internet that once felt innocent. The The subject line said only, "Please, read." For a moment, I hovered over it. The cursor blinked like hesitation translated into light. Then I opened it. Not out of curiosity but completion. Her words unfolded carefully, as though stepping across glass. "Your father's health is failing. We need help. Your sister has lost her job. Please come home, even for a moment." Home. The word felt foreign, like a city I'd once visited and forgotten the map to. I closed the email, but its echo lingered longer than expected. Compassion and anger collided like weather fronts, neither winning, both exhausting. In the weeks that followed, more messages came first from Mom, then from Dad's account, then one from an unknown sender that turned out to be Tara. Each message tried a different tone. Guilt, nostalgia, negotiation, none of them worked. They wrote as if history could be erased with polite punctuation. I didn't respond. My silence wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Some bridges aren't meant to burn, they simply dissolve when you stop walking across them. Still, fragments of memory began to surface when I least wanted them. The smell of Dad's workshop, the sound of Mom humming over a simmering pot, Tara's laughter from a hallway that had once belonged to both of us. The past doesn't disappear, it mutates, rearranging itself into new forms of distance. Then, one morning, the phone rang. Not unknown this time. It was a local hospital. The nurse mentioned Martin Brooks, stable but under observation. Words like cardiac episode, minor damage, monitoring period. I wrote them down mechanically, as if they belonged to someone else's family. I didn't go. I sent no flowers, no calls, no condolences. Instead, I worked late, longer than necessary, until the exhaustion blurred the edges of thought. But that night, staring out the office window, I realized the emotion I felt wasn't coldness, it was survival. You can't pour from an empty vessel, and they had drained me dry long before I learned to refill myself. The next day, a new email came from Mom. She wrote about Tara, her tone shifting again. "She's been struggling, Elena. Her savings are gone. She can't find work. Please, if not for us, then for her." Attached was a picture. Tara looked thinner, older, the polished certainty of her corporate world stripped away. Even pity refused to arrive. Choices had consequences, and hers had been rehearsed in arrogance. I deleted the photo. Then, for the first time in months, I powered off my phone completely. The stillness that followed was almost holy. Over the next week, I noticed how peace and guilt sound the same at first. Quiet, heavy, demanding to be named. But peace waits patiently, while guilt claws at the door. I chose the waiting one. Work carried me forward again. Projects expanded, my division grew, and new hires arrived who knew me only as Director Brooks, unaware of any past except performance metrics and results. That anonymity was freedom disguised as professionalism. Late one evening, as I left the building, a drizzle began light, persistent. I stood under it without moving. Somewhere across the city, my family was unraveling, learning the lessons I had paid for early. You can love people deeply, and still refuse to be destroyed by them. That is not vengeance. That is balance. When I reached home, the apartment smelled faintly of rain and paper. I opened my laptop, not to work, but to write one final thing, a single sentence addressed to no one, stored in a draft I would never send. Some debts are settled by silence. I saved it, closed the lid, and turned off the lights. The room exhaled with me. Outside, the rain thickened into rhythm, each drop erasing what little noise remained. Justice had already done its work. I didn't need to witness it. But peace, like truth, never stays hidden for long. It has a way of demanding proof, even when you think the story is finished. Spring didn't announce itself that year. It simply appeared quiet, almost embarrassed after so much cold. The river outside my window moved again, slow but certain, like something remembering how to live. I watched it most mornings before work, coffee cooling on the sill, my reflection folding into the glass. For once, stillness didn't mean waiting. It meant being. Work had stabilized into a kind of calm velocity. Deadlines met, promotions accepted, people depending on my structure. I was no longer chasing validation. I had become the foundation others leaned on. Yet, sometimes, in the middle of a meeting or while reading performance reports, a thought would surface. Is this what peace feels like, or just the absence of war? That question lingered like background static until one Thursday afternoon, when a letter, not an email, not a message, arrived on my desk, handwritten, unfamiliar. The return address read simply, E. Brooks. The handwriting wasn't my mother's. It was neat, restrained. Inside, A single sheet of paper, folded carefully. Dad is gone. It was peaceful. We didn't know how to reach you. Mom says she's sorry, though she doesn't know how to say it. We're leaving the old house soon. I hope you're well, Tara. I read it once, then again, searching for something that wasn't there: regret, maybe, or acknowledgement. But the words were polite, almost transactional, as if written to close an account. And perhaps that was exactly what they were. I didn't cry. Grief, when it finally came, was thin and unfamiliar, like rain on glass you watch but never touch. I felt no need to attend funerals or make calls. Death had already visited our family years before, when respect had died and mockery had taken its place. This was only paperwork. That night, I walked by the river again. The air smelled of thawing soil and iron. Across the water, office windows flickered in and out, hundreds of private lives unfolding at once. I wondered how many of them had families they couldn't return to, stories that had ended without ceremony. Maybe peace isn't about making amends. Maybe it's about learning not to reopen healed wounds just to prove they exist. A week later, Omar Reed announced his retirement. The company held a modest farewell reception. He called me aside before leaving, his expression warm. "You've built something real here, Elena," he said, "not just systems trust." After he left, they offered me his position. I accepted, quietly, without celebration. That night, I sat alone in my office, the city stretching below, and realized how far I had come from that party years ago, the one where laughter had cut deeper than knives. I had turned silence into structure, isolation into independence. Months passed. My name began to circulate in conferences, magazines, panels. Elena Brooks, Chief Technology Officer. The title didn't thrill me. What mattered was the space it represented, the distance between who I had been and who I had become. Sometimes I imagined Tara reading one of those articles, perhaps seeing my face in a headline while scrolling through her feed. I wondered what she felt: envy, remorse, or nothing at all. But then I'd remind myself, her feelings were no longer my responsibility. I had spent years unlearning the reflex to fix broken things that others had smashed willingly. One evening, while organizing old files, I found the first notebook I had kept when I left home. Between code sketches and financial plans, a line I barely remembered writing appeared in the corner of a page. "One day this silence will protect me." It had. That realization didn't bring triumph, it brought gratitude. Because peace, I finally understood, isn't the reward for revenge or the absence of enemies. It's the moment you stop needing anyone to see you win. Standing by the window, city lights reflected in the river like scattered gold. I thought of all the versions of myself I had outgrown: the girl who apologized for breathing too loud, the woman who waited for apologies that never came. They were gone, and in their place stood someone I had built carefully, without permission. I raised my glass to the night, not in defiance but acknowledgement. Some stories end with reconciliation. Mine ended with self-respect. And in the quiet that followed, I knew it was enough. If this story touched something in you, share your thoughts below. Would you have walked away like Elena, or chosen differently? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more family drama and revenge stories that remind us. Sometimes silence speaks the loudest.